Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Um, we're going, I hope, to the Northwest Territories of Canada today, but I'm not sure we will because my guest has not shown up. And it's time for us to go live. So I'm going to fill the time talking about the topic that she will talk about if she gets here. And of course, I'm not prepared to talk about this because it's not something about which I'm an expert. My guest is named Jackie Milne. She's in a farm on a few hundred miles, I think, from Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, which is very far north. It's up toward the Arctic Circle. And you wouldn't expect anybody to be able to farm there. Well, I wouldn't because I've never been even close to the Arctic Circle or anywhere near as far north as she. Here she is, I hope. Come in.
I'm sorry. The internet is so slow here right now. It's just painful, and I had to reinstall, but we made it. So I'm so
okay.
All
All right. That's great. I mean, it's wonderful to see you. And
yeah, so I'm up in Hay River, and it's an educational farm. So it's called the Northern Farm Training Institute, and it's in Hay River, Northwest Territories. Yes, yes. It's about 260 acres, but it's pretty much the majority of the original is intact boreal, and then all the cleared space is all just very much disturbed from all the previous industrial impacts, making the highway, looking for gravel. There was a confinement pig barn built there with government support about 25 years ago, which was a disaster and just a huge mess, which we had to clean all up. So it's really very much a restorational type of project right from the beginning, kind of like what we're
really
dealing with.
Stunned because I've never been to the Northwest Territories, and my image of it is it's just vast, untrammeled wasteland or open space that nobody's ever been in. But you make it sound like it's the worst of our industrial sites.
Just where we are. Just the spot where we are because of the highway, the original highway, and what they kept doing is looking for gravel as they were building the highway. And so they just and the train and in those days they would just bulldoze anything and just leave it, And so it's a learning experience. Every place has its potential for degeneration or regeneration. Mm-hmm. And every place is unique as to what kinds of systems will help that area flourish or improve. Like for myself, what I come to realize many years ago is when I was looking out my window at my garden, I realized something about humanity. I realized that we have the ability to destroy, right? And reduce the carrying capacity of life. But then I had a big revelation. Once we have the tools to take something apart, we have the tools to put it back together. You see? So because we know for a fact we have the ability to compromise and degenerate and reduce the carrying capacity for life, and that's very daunting and discouraging, it means we have the ability to work with life, nurture life, and help stimulate the life cycle of regeneration. And we just need to understand how to do that.
Oh, that's inspiring to think about it. Yeah, you're right. Now you say your farm is a training farm. What do you mean by that? Whom do you train?
Yeah, so predominantly, mostly people that live in the north, and in the Northwest Territories, demographically, half of the people that live here are First Nations. So just by default, lots of First Nations people have been my students. I have had people come from northern areas, like of Manitoba, and I've been contacted recently, actually, by an organization in Edmonton that is asking me to help with First Nations groups, maybe in northern Alberta. There's really interesting things happening right now. And I'm really considering, maybe helping a larger base. because of the experience that I have, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, now these indigenous people are they already farmers, or are you teaching them to become farmers?
Well, basically, that's an excellent question. So the way I phrase it is, you see, I don't want to teach a system that the whole world is realizing we have to change it. And so
Yeah.
what we have is we have the opportunity to, the first systems that we build, okay, can be more integrated with the natural systems. And so we have a slogan, and the slogan is, together we can harvest all we need. And the together is the together of the different sustainable systems that we know work. And so where a sustainable wild harvest is possible, well, we want to keep doing that, because that's actually the least negative. It's not dependent on fossil fuels, like to fish and do these things. So where it's sustainable, we totally encourage wild harvest. And then where there are gaps, like for instance, what's happened with the caribou in the north, there's all these different ideas as to why the population is declining. And so then to take pressure off the wild system so they can recover, well, what would be an appropriate domestic system to bring in to meet a need that humans have, while we give rest to that wild system? You see, because that's the challenge. Because when you're hungry, okay, when you feel lack, it affects it narrows our thinking to just right now. Well, I need this right now. I need to eat this right now. I'm going to, eat this last fish or this because I'm starving. You see, because that is one of the forces that, we have to address. And so that's sort of what we're doing. We're working at learning which systems can complement, like really small systems, even like raising rabbits. Rabbits have their natural food here. They're naturally prolific. And so we try to match, the equivalent species. There's with holistic management is a really special system, is really an observational skill set. Learning again how to be very observant, okay? And because so many of the things we do, like driving a car, if you drive a car all the time in the same place, after a while you can listen to music or a podcast and not even pay attention to what you see. You see, this is actually a disadvantage right now. And so holistic management is about learning very much how to observe the area where you are. And also what's really important, it's not about creating a system out of sync with the natural systems. Okay. It's about learning, what is the optimal for the combination of the system where you live. And when I say system, it's like the rain is part of the system, the soil is part of the system, the waterways are part of this, the type of vegetation that naturally would grow there or used to grow there, the types of animals and everything that would naturally want to live there or used to live there. Okay, so it's how to work with that and bring back optimal life carrying capacity for that space.
Okay, you jumped ahead beautifully, because everything you're saying is already inspiring me, because people haven't been told yet why they should listen to this show. All right. Now, I contacted you because for a couple of years now, I have been, well, let's even put it bluntly, I've been arguing with my friends because I'm of the opinion that one of the most important things that we can do to stop global warming is to put carbon back in the soil, and that there are ways of doing this through farming and through animal husbandry that greatly increase the improve, not only because farming is 1/4 of the emissions of greenhouse gases that are going back into the atmosphere and causing trouble. But the plants can sequester carbon into the soil and make it stay there, who knows how long, but variable lengths of time. It's not sure, I guess. So I've been thinking, we should just concentrate very much on putting carbon back into the soil. And of course, then the question is, it's easy to convince people, or pretty easy to convince people, that there are certain techniques of farming plants that you want to adopt because it will keep the soil in the carbon in the soil and enable more of it to be put there. So we can talk about that. Plants, the vegetables, the grains, and other trees, of course, that we raise and should raise more of, and how to do it in such a way that instead of turning over the soil and putting carbon back into the atmosphere, we're actually reducing the amount of carbon that's already in the atmosphere. So it can be carbon negative. And I think this is well established by now. So I want to talk about that. But then, of course, very quickly, we get to the question of, well, what about animals? Because all of my friends are vegan, practically, or if they aren't vegan already, they're feeling guilty about not being vegan. And of course, half of the conversations that I get when people start talking about stopping global warming is about how we have to stop eating meat. And I usually stop them and say, I don't agree, because it's a question not of eating the meat, but how you produce the meat. Because my understanding is, and here you're the expert, that various ways of raising herds of big animals vary tremendously in the effect on the environment. Some of them are very harmful to the environment. And some methods of animal husbandry are extremely good for the environment, including reducing carbon emissions. All right. Now, that's why I started looking for people like you. I want to interview a number of people who have actually been doing these techniques. And I guess the main catchphrase for this approach is regenerative agriculture, right? That's the typical term for the type of agriculture that looks not only to put more carbon into the soil, but to probably increase the quality of the food that we produce on the soil, because rich, dark, black carbon soil is going to produce healthy food. All right. Then there's a guy named Alan Savory who invented, or maybe he was just the first to publicize the idea, the notion that large herds of cattle or other herbivores can improve the quality of the soil if handled properly. Now, you're not going to have large herds of animals unless you have somebody wanting to eat them. And therefore, I believe we have to remind people that meat eating is not a bad thing. It's a question of where your meat comes from and how you've processed the animals to get it. All right. So that's where I thought, okay, I'd like to get from somebody from the Savory group, but I haven't quite snared the right person yet. And then I started looking for real farmers who've done this kind of work. Now that's my introduction to how I got to you. Now you can tell me. Oh, and the Savory method, Alan Savory, has taught a lot of people. I don't know whether he taught you or did you learn to?
Yes, I personally know him. Yes, I've been to his home in Zimbabwe.
Really?
I got a passport to leave Canada, and the first place I ever went outside of Canada was to Zimbabwe, to Alan Savory's home.
I would.
That's how much I believe in it.
If I could go. That is wonderful news. Okay, and so I don't know how I got to you, but I'm pretty sure it would be through that network. Yeah. So that his method, he calls it holistic management, right? Yes. All right. So now we're set up to talk about what you do and how
Okay.
if you're teaching regenerative agriculture to
Yeah.
people in the Northwest Territories, and let me go back to my initial question.
Okay.
I don't know the native people around you who are maybe some of the students you're teaching. And to what extent would you say their traditional practices are compatible with the kinds of methods that you want to promote?
Right. So what's important is we have made a lot of assumptions about semi-nomadic people, and through anthropology, okay, we will refer to people that did not live in permanent settlements as hunter-gatherers, but that's an abbreviated term. Some anthropologists will say they are hunter-gatherers and horticulturists. Okay. And there's a book called A Buffalo Bird Woman that was written in the 1900s by an anthropologist who was traveling through North America and came upon a small group of women, a woman who, and this is published, okay, this was very close to the Canadian border. I can't remember which state. Part of their culture was also the domestication of corn, beans, squash, okay, sunflower seeds, okay? So what they did is in their summer place where they would stay in the summer and fish and hunt deer, they also practice horticulture. And the difference between a horticultural society and an agricultural society is that everyone learns. Everyone learns the essential skills of food production. It is not specialized like how we have just a small percentage of people. Okay. So hunter, gatherer, and horticulturist is most likely the most sustainable system because it's so flexible. Oh, okay. The season for growing plants with low inputs is past. And now we go to the winter where we're going to maybe follow the bison and hunt. And while we're doing that, we're going to gather. And it's also been discovered and studied when they went and would gather roots, it wasn't just random. They had been doing that gathering in those spaces for generations and would deliberately leave the seed of the favorable plants to self-cast. Okay. So they were interacting with the food systems of their environment in a purposeful way that was less impactful. So we coming from a system where we just take over and bulldoze and grade and till, to us, that's the only way to interact with nature to get our food. But that's not true. And I mean, even now in South America, okay, with the terra preta soil, and the Amazonian. Okay, so basically what they've discovered is some of the trees that are the most medicinal and food-bearing trees and nut-bearing trees are all more concentrated in species around what they now realize are the original settlements of the people there that ended up, they think, dying from
Do they
the
think
plague.
these people planted them there?
Yes, and that what happened is then they've just self-seeded out. But those were the domesticated trees and medicine plants and everything of those people. Yeah. Yes. And so there's a lot we're learning. And so it would depend on where you live. And so see, now what's happened in North America is that First Nations people were struck such a traumatic blow, okay? Like a very purposeful, systematic strike that so many First Nations people themselves, the memory of what they did has been fractured in many places. Like in the Northwest Territories is probably one of the few places where there are First Nations people that didn't all end up in the residential schools. They still speak their language. They still know about, their traditional knowledge, so that there is still a little bit practiced. But now what's important to understand too is as you go farther north, the food producing vegetation is much less. Like seeds, seed trees and that don't grow. So automatically, as you go north, you're going to have just organically a much more a 100% carnivore diet. And I want to stress something here, as I'm really glad you mentioned the vegan movement. Now, what is happening is I feel a lot of compassion because of the moral dilemma. It's true. The industrial way of farming animals is wrong, and I don't agree with it. And we have to find a way to help those animals get free, the same as people, because we need the animals' help. Okay? Now, sometimes I have seen that people have tried to morph plant-based eating as a more spiritual way of being, and that your spiritual component of yourself will flourish. Let us not forget the First Nations people were probably and are the most spiritual people. They had the awareness and understanding of the great spirit that is in all things, and the love. And I'm getting goosebumps and I want to cry. Let me tell you, the love First Nations people have for the earth is beyond anything I've ever seen. They are willing to give up everything for her. They are willing to live without running water, without electricity, without so many things. If they knew for sure that it would make a difference, they would do it. They would lead us, okay? Because they still have that in their soul. And they were meat eaters, okay? So it's not the meat itself. It's the relationship between us, the animals, and the earth. And when meat is being produced that is helping to stimulate life for the next year, that is good. But let us not forget that animals don't just produce meat, they produce milk. And a lot of people have problems with milk because it's pasteurized. Okay? There is a huge amount of information on raw dairy products that are totally different, and people can eat them and digest them and even recover their health. And so you might need to have your own dairy animal because, we forget. And so there are, I've actually looked at this. Okay, there's actually enough cattle and enough sheep and enough goats alive right now that the whole world could have just an unbelievable, a total collapse and all the systems shut down. And we could be kept alive from the milk from all these animals. I'm talking the population we have now. If they were removed from the feedlot systems and put out in and grazed in a nature mimicking way, we could be sustained. Yeah.
But there are people in large areas of the world that don't drink milk.
Yeah, that's right.
They have it's not an allergy, but they don't have a certain enzyme or something that enables them to digest it. When I was taking a geography course as an undergraduate, I saw a map of part of the world showing the regions that use milk and the regions that don't. And I've looked for it ever since because I'd love to see it again. But I think in large parts of Asia, they can't consume milk. Although I've heard that they can consume a certain amount in, I don't know whether it's yogurt or ice cream or something.
Yes, semi-digested. And like in the Mongolian area, they use yaks, and they will render the milk and meat and get the butter, because the fat is fat, right? So, and that's really the most valuable part is fat. Fat will become sacred again. If you look in most religious traditions, especially in the Old Testament, the fat was something offered on the altar to God.
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
It is, because if you get cut off from the industrial food supply, it's really important to understand. It's the number one thing that will be the hardest thing for you to get is simply enough calories to fuel your body. And that's why fat traditionally was a sacred food, because it's the most dense form of nutrition available to human beings. Mm-hmm. And our body is adapted so that we can go between what's called ketogenics, when our body has evolved to be able to live 100% on animal-based foods when necessary. I feel myself that the diet, it's not about being always vegan or always a carnivore. I think that's more connected to the seasonal change. Okay. And that in the winter, you might have more of an animal-based diet, and in the summer, a plant and fruit-based diet. And I feel
excuse me, but are you saying that for a large part of the time, the northern indigenous people that you know, or any of them, used to live entirely on animal products?
100%. People think they used to eat plants. They would eat the stomach content of the animals they hunted.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, like the reindeer moss. Now, reindeer are special because they have an extra enzyme in their stomach that only snails have, that can digest the lichen. Okay, that was considered a delicacy when they would be, and so the indigenous people, they observed the wild animals, and what do wild animals do? They eat the stomach content of the animals they hunt first, and so that's how they learned to survive, as they observed how everything else lived. You see? And that's part of this skill set we need to restore in our culture, is observation of what works.
Yeah, well, I never heard of anybody eating until a few years ago when I ran into a friend who had been backpacking in Serbia, I believe, while it was still Yugoslavia, you know. And he said he went for, I think he said 3 weeks or a month, traveling around Yugoslavia, and he never had a bit of anything to eat except meat. Yep. It's unbelievable to me whether they don't have any restaurants that serve salads or whatever. Yeah. But there was nothing. Yeah. He had nothing to eat. But I also have some Serbian friends, and when we go out to dinner in a Serbian restaurant, it is mostly meat, large, huge platters full of meat.
Yes.
So apparently there are people still, civilized industrial societies that have still consume a lot of meat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like there's a psychiatrist who's written a book called The Carnivore Diet. Okay, it's astonishing. Like there are doctors now, psychiatrists. I got to tell you this one, okay? This blew my mind, okay? This is a true story, okay? And I'll send you the information. A woman who was a senior who had been diagnosed with acute paranoid schizophrenia from her 20s, who had to live with caregivers that would take her out, and she suffered from it terribly, and the medication had caused her to become very overweight, so it was causing her to be kind of disabled. And so one of her new caregivers suggested she try the keto diet to lose weight, because and so she did, and after a week or two, once she got into ketogenic, she said, never mind losing weight, my fear went away. And so she'd suffered this for decades. So then she began to seek for a psychiatrist, doctor, that would have any insight onto why this type of diet helped her. Okay. And she did. And so what they're discovering, you see, and this is why I'm saying I think we need to pulse between the two diets. Continuous exposure to certain plant toxins, because you got to realize animals can run away from us, right? Plants can't. Plants have compounds in them that can accumulate in our tissue and cause inflammation. And they've discovered now that this woman, just so you know, 100% recovered 12 years ago from her schizophrenia when she was a senior, and is off all medication because she embraced this ketogenic diet.
Well, yeah. I hope other people are doing research on whether you can generalize about that.
They really are. And so it's not that you have to necessarily stay on it all the time, but if you get an out of control inflammatory thing happening in your body, okay, if you go now, what's important too about eating meat? It's not just about eating the muscle meat. If you're going to do this, even for a time, you need to eat the liver, the heart, the kidneys, everything. like First Nations people. They never wasted anything. They even ate the cartilage. They boiled the bones. It's got to be everything to get all the nutrients. Okay. Because if you just ate the muscle meat over a long time, you would start suffering deficiencies. So that's important to know. But I mean, it's not that we have to eat like that, like it's just that we don't realize that our body has evolved to be able to do that for a reason. And now they believe that this is also why what contributed to the expansion of the human brain. Literally.
The only, I did look at some of the evidence about the health effects of meat or non-meat diets. And one interesting source is an epidemiologist named Jha, Prabhat Jha, who's in Toronto. He's from India, and he's doing a huge study of 1 million, I think it's 1 million deaths in India. He has people who go door to door and talk to the families after somebody has died. So they have 1 million deaths. And so that gives them a large an And one of the things he was analyzing in the talk that he reported a few years ago to an event that I hosted was the comparison between vegan or vegetarians and non-vegetarians. And India is a good place to study that, because normally if a person is vegetarian, it's because they've been brought up that way all their lives and they've always been vegetarians or not. So there are a lot of vegetarians in India. So he compared them, and he said that there's no difference between the mortality rates and the morbidity rates of vegetarians and non-vegetarians, except for women. And he said he thinks that there's an explanation that is unique to India for that, because the Indian women traditionally are supposed to feed the men, the males, and the children first, and then whatever's left over they consume. Therefore, if they serve a big platter full of food that contains protein, the rest of the family will eat all the protein and leave them with nothing except carbs or something. And so the vegetarian women have a higher mortality rate. So anyway, that's the explanation he gives.
And look at how they treat the cow, right? It's the milk. And they have a very special dairy system there where you can have one cow and bring it and sell it, and people can come to these creameries and buy 1 cup of milk to drink.
Really?
Yeah. And so that was brilliant. Like the sacred cow there, because you see, a cow can feed like 10 times more people through her milk than through eating her flesh. So, really? So the transformation of the relationship they have with cows is, I would say, for sure, one of the reasons why they're able to support such a large population. And there's been so much disruption to the culture of food, but I wanted to, something just popped in my mind that, because we were talking about the original question with, the soil, right? And how essential it is. And for sure, we now understand through science, we can heal the soil. And even James Lovelock, I don't know if you know who James Lovelock is. Okay. He was absolutely a doomer. He just was so, until he learned about the soil carbon equation.
Oh. Okay.
Yes. And he said, I realize on paper, mathematically, it can be done. They've calculated it. We could stabilize carbon emissions if there was a global united approach in 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And this would be like healing the desertified. So it would be like a scar, like if you get a really big scar, you don't go in, the scab doesn't form, it's from the peripheral. Okay. And then it grows in. Okay, so that's kind of how this would happen. We would have to approach it from the peripheral, like the Sahel. There's the Sahara, and then there's that peripheral green line. That's where we would start with the animals, and then they would keep healing just like a scar. Now, what happened to me is I was walking and I get epiphanies. You know, I think when you go in nature and walk bare feet, it connects you to a something. It really connects you to something, people. It really does. And so you'll get these incredible epiphanies and knowings that will inspire you and lift your heart. And this is the one that came to me. It is, I do not believe, a coincidence that at this dire, critical time, that our ancestors did not deliberately destroy the planet. They did not know. They did not know what they were doing because they were in that just now I got to survive. Just now I got to eat. Just now I have to feed my child. And oh, it's just this little bit, and this bit of the forest I'll cut down. You see, but it just kept spreading and spreading. And we are the generation who's discovered we've done it, but we didn't know we were doing it. Like our grandparents did not know when they were plowing up those fields what they were doing. Okay. So now here it is. We have billions of people that cannot continue to live the way we were. But the earth has been so scarred and so injured. She needs this many of us to help her heal. You see, the answer has been born. The army to heal the earth is alive right now. And we have all the animals in captivity that also want to go free with us. I believe there are ruins of an ancient city from a previous civilization that inhabited this planet that goes back from before the glacier time. So it would be older than 125 years. Now, interestingly, a giant skeleton head was just reported in The Guardian that was hidden in a well, I think in Japan. And they dated it to, I think, 135 years old, 135,000 years old. So the dating of the skeleton. Now, why this is so relevant with the giants is because the First Nations people in the Northwest Territories and where I live, okay, they all share very detailed stories of the history of North America and their ancestry having lived with giants, and that most of the giants were terrible predators and cannibals and used to hunt them. But a giant that they still know his name, I don't even know, befriended a group of Dene and guided them to the north. And they say he taught them how to live and survive. Now, what's so interesting is, according to the legend, he brought them here to Hay River, and he marked out the boundary for the Dene here and said that this was their sacred land. And he gave them, I believe, the 10 laws that they live by. And it stressed to them how sacred the land was. And if they lived in respect with the land would always provide for them. Now, what's astonishing is I accidentally stumbled on this, okay? There was a big forest fire, I don't know, 2014 or 2016, I can't remember, that burned 80,000 hectares of land in this exact area. And then because of Google Maps with the satellite imagery, it took new pictures. And all of a sudden, you can see all these formations, these totally perfectly straight and squares and even moats. And it's like, it looks like ruins, just foundational ruins, like not anything, maybe a little bit sticking out. Now, why this is significant is because it's exactly within the boundary that their legend said this giant gave to them. And so then for me, I go, oh my God, he was probably a descendant himself, and he knew where he was from. And finally, the glacier retreated, and he simply wanted to return to where he was. But he knew his people were going extinct, and he taught them something. This is very important. 2 different First Nations people told me the same thing that live in very far apart. They said that they've been told that the stones are sacred and they are to never move them because it could affect the weather. This is important. This picture is from Russia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I want you to see is in the bottom left corner, you can see like these large rectangular like stones. Okay, you can see that?
Well, not really.
Right in the bottom left corner, going around. It's basically, this is just a remnant of an old, what they call star fort. Okay. But the reason I shared that with you is it's kind of hard. It's grown over, but it looks like this formation was a very large monolithic like type stones. And so this picture is a picture that's zoomed out. The picture that is zoomed in is just showing, if you look at that really close, there are these, it's like they're giant blocks that floated and slightly separated from each other. And you can, on Google Maps, you can zoom in, and then you will see, you can almost see the stones or whatever it was that's in the ground. So that's zoomed out. That's the view of far away. And then that last picture that you had just showed that was really close.
Is this
that
it?
one? Yes, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one. Now that's the original one I found, the one you're showing right now.
Where it's got these grid, I mean, straight lines.
But if you look, you see the other line that is like a chopped off star curve. So those little white lines are modern cut lines. Okay, that's human activity. And look how small it is. This is an example of what has to be investigated.
Okay, now you've seen this. I'm not persuaded because I don't know. I'm not in the habit of looking at things like this. I'm going to put us back.
No problem.
Now,
no problem.
Okay, I'm not convinced. Anyway, so what happened? Did you go look around yourself or what?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I talked to a lot of First Nations people. And once I talked to them, okay, so there is something different, definitely. There is like, how do I explain? Really anomalous stones that look like bricks, giant bolt, like just out of place completely. Okay, completely out of place. This area is so huge. I just want to stress it covers like a 60 kilometer by 80 kilometer. Like it's vast. The original center, which they call their most sacred space, which from my observation looks like there was a large city built out of stone in a very different way with moats.
I want you to get some specialist in archaeology to go out there and look at it with you.
I'm trying.
Okay, because then I'll talk to you further. Because I don't know what to make of this, but if I love you. I love your personality because you're so enthusiastic and interested, and therefore I want it all to be true because it
definitely deserves
to be a good story. If your story is true, it's going to be wonderful. So, but we're getting toward the end of time for our talk, but I want to share with you. Let's go back to this regenerative thing.
Sure.
Because as it happens, today, I subscribed lately to the San Francisco Chronicle, which I will, with no prompting, tell you that I think it's the best newspaper in the world. I mean, I read it in preference to the New York Times any day of the week. Anyway, the San Francisco Chronicle today, which I was reading with my breakfast, has an article on the front page. I don't know whether I can show you the Chronicle's whole front page. Let's see if it even shows. San Francisco Chronicle. If I scroll down a little bit, regenerative farms fight climate change. See that?
Yes.
And the whole article is about how in California, there's a lot going on to promote regenerative agriculture. And they give, it starts off with a story about some farmer who goes and looks at a piece of land where they're raising hay. And he says he's never seen anything like it, the amount of hay that's produced on this. So what was happening is apparently these farmers had been using compost.
Mm-hmm.
And but then he goes on, and there's a woman named Professor Silva at UC Berkeley, and Berkeley is my alma mater. So, and I lived there for 20 years, so I know Berkeley, and I love Berkeley, and I will get in touch with this woman named Silver, and she is one of the people doing research on the use of carbon farming or regenerative agriculture. And has been putting it and has been measuring how long it can stay in the soil and how to do it and so on. And some of the techniques of just plain raising. And the other thing she says is that animal farming, so to speak, keeping animals grazing and so on, is more beneficial in carbon sequestration than farming plants. Although they don't seem to have yet got very good data on this. I would hope that by now they'd have more information. I do know that I've come across some other farmers who are doing this kind of agriculture and who do keep track of the amount of carbon they're putting in the soil each year, for example. And I know that there's a place, you've probably heard about it, called White Oaks.
Yep. I know him personally. I've been there. Yeah. I know them. Yes, absolutely. And they've got a third party. I was going to tell it to you.
Okay, tell me what you know about that farm, because it seems to be taken as kind of a paragon of excellent regenerative farming.
It really is. It really is. Yeah. It's like, it's the best example that I could, basically tell you. I mean, there was a ghost town, okay, that is literally like the old courthouse is his office. Their farm has brought that rural town back to life. He employs like probably 120 people, and they're incorporating, like it's absolutely works. It absolutely works. Okay. Now, I know we don't have very much time. And so I wanted to address the one comment about methane, because we can have studies and things that really show it really works. You do need to understand what you're doing. Basically, what we have to do is we have to become what we've displaced. And in this situation, what's been displaced is the natural relationship between the predators and the prey. And all the wild herds used to be moved constantly because of pressure from the predators. You see, and we broke that cycle. You see, what's important is these animals have 4 legs for a reason. They got to move, move, move. It's when they stay and linger too long in one spot where the damage gets done. Okay, so that's really important. But the damage to the soil gets done. Yes, because they just stay.
And
just like us.
They overgraze. Overgrazing is a problem, right?
Yeah, just like us on the couch eating potato chips. What happens, right? Not healthy. No. Just sitting in one spot, eating. Not good. Yeah, same with the animals. And so that's partly what you learn is you learn as the human to create that same impact as the predator, moving them, and then you move them to the place that's best for them to be moved at. And that's what the system teaches you, is how to study your land and learn which place to go. I mean, there's so many fantastic stories about how farmers have in South America literally put all their sheep together, like 50,000 head of sheep, because all the land was degrading. I can't remember, it's slipping my mind, the place. And they, as collaborating together, they did a 1-year plan. So every farm was used and got the beneficial impact, and they were able to restart, basically trigger the Genesis effect. It's like Genesis, when the land is dying, there's no life. How do you trigger that life cycle again? And that's how they can use the animals to do it. But let's briefly, just quickly touch on the methane. Okay, so we know that right now, basically, there's not enough green vegetation on the planet. And the animals can help the grass grow more and thus pump more carbon into the soil. Because when properly grazed, okay, grass, how many people say, oh, I cut my lawn and it grows faster? Yes, it literally does. Because it co-evolved with animals that would do that. Okay. And so you can prolong the vegetative state of grass and forbs and delay the seed setting, okay, by 8 times, 8 physical times more carbonous, leafy material can be created, okay, can physically be encouraged to grow.
But, by having animals there.
Yes. And knowing the pulse. It's like music, you know, when you're in an orchestra, there's a rhythm to the song. Every place has its own song, depending on the water, depending on the temperature, okay? So it's not a cookie cutter type system. Mm-hmm. That's what's really important to understand. But say 100 years out from now, and we've completely re-greened the vegetation, and now it's prolific and it's jungle and it's growing and it's sucking all the CO2 out of the air. What would happen? The earth would begin to cool. So the methane, you see, the methane is needed in a healthy system. If there's enough vegetation and plants eating the vegetation, they're going to be pulling all the carbon out of the air. Well, what gas will counteract that and prevent us from plunging into the ice age again? Would be the methane. You see,
no,
so
I'm lost. I don't
in the future.
No,
you don't get that. Okay. Oh, no. In the future, okay, if the earth is fully revegetated and all the plants are drinking in, inhaling the CO2, okay, sucking the CO2 out, technically the CO2 would keep dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping from the atmosphere, right? Because the planet would be revegetated. But we know we need some greenhouse gases to keep the temperature perfect. And if we
yes, but I mean, we're not anywhere near that point.
No, that's what I'm saying.
From that. So,
yes, but what I'm saying is this is an argument that's used against animals. They say, oh, but animals produce methane and that's bad.
No, I think that the logic is it's a closed cycle with animals. That the animals take the carbon out of the vegetation and they put it back into the atmosphere as methane, but that methane doesn't last very long. It's broken down into CO2 within a decade or so.
Yes. Yes.
And then the CO2 is absorbed by the plants, which the animals eat. So it's a cycle, and it's a closed cycle. It doesn't accumulate. If you have the same number of animals, you'd have the same amount of methane in the atmosphere at all times. So it's the additional amounts of methane that we're putting into the atmosphere that cause the problem. But it is a problem. I mean, I don't want to, let's not leave the idea festering that or, you know, try to promote the idea that methane isn't a problem, because it's a grave problem, I think.
But it won't be a problem. You see, what I'm saying is if we regenerate the planet, it will not be a problem. It's part of what
I would say that the animals are not part of are not contributing to the problem, because they are part of the cycle of taking the methane back and putting it goes back. But the problem that we're facing has to do with the additional carbon being put into the atmosphere from other sources, like fossil fuels being dragged out of the soil and put in, or methane that's in the bottom of places like the Arctic Ocean, which that's coming up. Those are the and rice, growing rice, and the number of places in which agriculture can do harmful things.
But when the cows and that eat the grass too, what's important is that the grass is like a pump. and the roots, okay, keep pumping through the liquids that they make the carbon into the soil, and every time it's eaten, there's like a pulse back and forth, and so that's how it's pumped into the soil. It's physically pumped in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we've gone way over time. I'm going to have to do some serious editing to get it to fit my 1 hour. But it's been great fun. I'd love to talk another couple of hours with you, but I better go now.
Thank you so much for inviting
Jackie.
me.
It's been
You
a
bet.
real pleasure. Keep me
Awesome.
posted on the results of your archaeological
I
investigation.
will, once I get somebody. It's just because of everything. Everything is shut down. It's so hard right now, but I'm
Okay.
sure we'll get through it. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Believe you can do it.